Well, this time we'll take up chapter 7 from the essays on the Gita. And the title is The Creed of the Aryan Fighter. And you will see that right in the beginning of chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, Shri Krishna is telling Arjuna, whence has come to thee this dejection, this stain and darkness of the soul in the hour of difficulty and peril, O Arjuna? This is not the way cherished by the Aryan man. This mood came not from heaven, nor can it lead to heaven. And on earth it is a forfeiting of glory. Well, I read out this verse majorly to tell you from where this word Aryan comes in. Why is this chapter called The Creed of the Aryan Fighter? Because here this chapter is more or less based on chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. And in verse 2, Sri Krishna is telling that this is not the way cherished by the Aryan man. So what does it mean? Who is this Aryan man? Is it a different ideal? Does it represent a different culture? Because if you do not know the concept of the Aryan, you may have heard about it. We had the Aryans and the Dravidians, and then, the Aryans who really invaded the country and all that. But I would like to see it more as a concept, not as a race as much. But what does it mean, the Aryan fighter or the Aryan man, as Aurobindo calls here, cherished? This is not the way that is cherished by the Aryan man. So there is a particular way, a particular ideal. What it is that we'll have to see first before I go further in the chapter. You see, coming to Sri Aurobindo and getting a definition from Sri Aurobindo, that is from volume 10 on page 252, we have the definition of the word Aryan. I read out from this volume. The word arata, move or strive. Like its congeners Ari, Arya, Arya, Arata, Arani, expresses the central idea of the Veda. The root Ar indicates always a movement of effort or of struggle or a state of surpassing height or excellence. It is applied to rowing, plowing, fighting, lifting, climbing. So you see, the root word Ar basically means to surpass in height or excellence. So whichever job involves this kind of a surpassing, as you're saying, fighting or plowing or lifting or climbing, all these words, they start with this word Ar. The Aryan then is the man who seeks to fulfill himself by the Vedic action, the internal and external karma or apas, which is of the nature of a sacrifice to the gods. But it is also imaged as a journey, a march, a battle, a climbing upwards. The Aryan man labors towards heights, fights his way on in a march which is at once a progress forward and an ascent. That is his Aryahood, his arete, virtue, to use a Greek word derived from the same root. Arata, with the rest of the phrase, might be translated out and push forward in other fields. Well, from here you have seen the root of the word, which is to excel oneself. So when we said that this word Aryan means one who labors towards heights, fights his way on in a march which is at once progress forward and an ascent. So we can see the word itself means someone who self-exceeds and goes forward and fights his way on the march of life and towards greater heights of consciousness. That is something very, very crucial, because here is a person who wants to ascend in his consciousness, one who is moving forward. So it's not a man who is bogged down in life and depressed and he cannot be active, he's not a tamasic man, but one who is a fighter for, if I can say the word, fighter for truth, somebody who wants to heighten himself in his consciousness. So when he say the word, when Sri Krishna is using the word here, he says, this is not the way cherished by the Aryan man. So what is the way cherished by the Aryan man? The one which leads one to a greater consciousness. One where the individual does not lie down, giving up, as did Arjuna, who gave up the fight, who gave up the battle, who gave up all that he represented. So that is the root cause why Lord Krishna is saying that this is not the way of the Aryan. And then we see the qualities further described about an Aryan. We get in a very brief para in this volume number 17, page 211. Now here is a sentence that I read out, a very brief sentence. The thirst of knowledge. You see, in our ancient times, we did not have the words sir and mister and all that. We used to say Arya. We used to, have this kind of a communication saying, O Arya. So you can see always the ideal of the Aryan was put forward. We didn't say, hey sir, hey Mr. Reddy or something. These are all modern terms which have no ideology behind it. But when we address as Arya, what did we mean? The one with the thirst of knowledge, the self-devotion, the purity, the renunciation of the Brahmin, the courage, ardor, honor, nobility, chivalry, patriotism of the kshatriya, the beneficence, skill, industry, generous enterprise, and large open-handedness of the Vaishya, the self-effacement and loving service of the Shudra. These are the qualities of the Aryan. So you can see this word meant a great culture. So if you are called an Aryan, it was really a great noble thing, because you represented, you see, all the four castes together, not as castes but the qualities of the caste. You can see the thirst for knowledge, the courage, the beneficence and the self-effacement of of all these four classes. So an Aryan in that way represented in the Indian culture a man who was highly spiritual almost. He was not even an ethical man or a moral man, but one who combined all the spiritual, moral, ethical, social qualities. So we have, I'm giving you a description of all this because why did Sri Krishna say the word, this is not the way that an Aryan should behave? So you see, that is where we see further meaning. And again, we have a little note in the same volume 10, regarding the normal, usual difference, because I know some of you must be thinking about the word Aryan it comes to as an opposition with Arya and Dasyus. Now, how does this word come here? We have a little explanation. The Dasyus are the haters of the sacred word. Now let me give you one more sentence before that. It says, we have seen not once but repeatedly that it is impossible to read into the story of Angirasas, Indra and Sarama, the cave of the Panis and the conquest of the dawn, the sun and the cows, an account of a political and military struggle between Aryan invaders and Dravidian cave dwellers. I am bringing down this problem from the concept to how it was used socially. You see, in India, there's the famous theory, as most of you must have heard by now, about the invasion of the Aryans. And that the South Indians are the Dravidians and the North Indians are the Aryans. This has been given to us thanks to the Germans and the British scholars and historians. They divided the country into Aryans, North and South Dravidian. And let's see what Aurobindo has to say here. He says, in fact, it is a struggle between the seekers of light and the powers of darkness. The cows are the illuminations of the sun and the dawn. They cannot be physical cows. The wide, fear-free field of the cows won by Indra for the Aryans is the wide world of Swar, the world of the solar illumination, the threefold luminous regions of heaven. The Dasyus are the haters of the sacred word. Aryans and Dasyus, we say they are the haters of the sacred word. They are those who give not to the gods the gift or the holy wine, who keep their wealth of cows and horses and other treasure for themselves and do not give them to the seers. They are those who do not the sacrifice. We may, if we like, suppose that there is a struggle between the two different cults in India, and that the rishis took their images from the physical struggle between the human representatives of these cults and applied them to the spiritual conflict. But it is perfectly certain that in the Rig Veda, at least, it is the spiritual conflict and victory, not the physical battle and plunder of which they are speaking. But this has a background, to say that South Indians are Dravidians and the Dravidians are these Dasyus and our North Indians are Aryans and they are these people of light, etc. So this has been historically, spread by the foreigners and it got settled in our Indian psyche. So there is this problem of the North and the South, and today also you see in Maharashtra things happening against North Indians, and somebody in South would say they are the Northerners. See, all this is a humbug thing. Even on the racial level, Aurobindo would say, is not true, and I will read it out. So basically, let us understand the word Aryan and Dasyu. The Dasyus are symbolically haters of light, selfish people who keep things for themselves. And we have seen the word Aryan is one who is spiritual, who is noble, who really fights for a higher light of consciousness. So I can be a Dasyu and you can be an Aryan. It has nothing to do with race. But one who lives in a lower consciousness, he is the Dasyu. One who seeks for a higher consciousness is the Aryan. So he says, whatever may be the racial interpretations that were given later on, but at least in Rig Veda, it has no racial intonation at all. The conflict between Aryan and Dasyu is purely the conflict between light and darkness. It's purely a spiritual battle. Then, of course, he comes to discuss a few things. But there's one more detail. There are two great divisions of the Dasyus. the Panis, who intercept both the cows and the waters but are especially associated with the refusal of the cows. The Vritras, who intercept the waters and the light but are especially associated with the withholding of the waters. Now this is again a little important detail, because some of you who have gone into the Vedas, you would know that one of the most important stories in the Vedas is that of the Panis who have stolen the sun and they have hid it under the rocks in some cave. And also they have stolen the cows and hidden them away. So this is a simple story, but then what happens? The gods, they come down and then release these cows and release the sun and they take it back. Of course, I'm telling you in much simple terms, but you can imagine almost the whole Vedic philosophy is embedded in this single story. That means there is the involution and there is the evolution. The hiding of the sun under the rocks is nothing but the supramental sun which is there in the inconscient. According to Aurobindo's philosophy of involution, that is the supermind itself comes into the inconscient. That is the hiding of the sun in the inconscient. And then the gods coming, and when the gods come there, it is the question of, where they employ the different Sarama, and there are the different Agni, there's Indra. All these gods are sent to release. And there's a fight between the Panis, who are the Dasyus, the haters of light, and the gods. And it is this fight which is called the journey of the human life towards a higher spirituality. Because in all of us, the divine is hidden within. But to bring forth the divine, in Aurobindo's terminology, to bring out the psychic being and make him the ruler of life, that is the basis of Aurobindo's yoga also. But in Vedic terminology, they have given it as a battle between the light and darkness within man. Remember always that the Vedas is nothing but a complete study on the psychological level. It is not just stories and given to you and saying there is Indra and Varuna, Agni goes up and Agni brings down. Nothing of the sort. Well, people have interpreted it in all kinds of ways. But Aurobindo would say it is basically psychological. Otherwise, just to tell you good stories, bedtime stories, is not the intention of the Vedas. But when they say that there's a battle between light and darkness is within us, and when they say give oblation to Agni, it's not you put a fire and then put ghee in that and then you say, okay, I've done my yajna and it's over. The yajna is constantly happening within us. The fire is the psychic being. Putting the ghee is nothing but offering our own works and thoughts and emotions. This is what we call the purified ghee, purified mind. So, our flame is increased by the input of the sacrifice of ghee, you say, of sandalwood, you say, of some special plants, you say. All this represent our own actions, our own thoughts, our own emotions. So you see, Vedic Yajna interpreted by Aurobindo is the same thing. That we have to bring forth the psychic being by a constant yajna or offering or surrendering of all the external movements of our mind, life and body. So yajna is not a ceremony to be done before marriage or the birth of a child or etc., etc. But we have taken it conveniently to be done at a certain time. We call a purohit and then we say, well, you do the yajna and it's over. You have nothing to do. Whereas the yajna is constantly, you have to do the yajna. Not as somebody, purohit, doing it for you. However, that is the whole meaning of the Panis story. Of course, the release of the sun is not yet there. The supramental sun is released now with the Sri Aurobindo's coming. Well, that is the delay. One interpretation. I'll not give you too much of that. We have to go back to the Gita. But there's one more detail here. We must remember that the Dasyus have been identified with the darkness. Therefore, the Aryans must be connected with the light. And we actually find that the light of the sun is called in the Veda the Aryan light, in contradistinction evidently to the Dasa darkness. But then with all these associations, he would tell us that all this question of the races, when he comes to Pondicherry, he says that I have observed that there is no difference at all between the races of North and South. He has written a long essay called The Origins of Aryan Speech, wherein he writes that the philologists have, for instance, split up on the strength of linguistic differences the Indian nationality into the northern Aryan race and the southern Dravidian. Dravidian, again the negative concept of the Dasyus. And it says, but sound observation shows a single physical type with minor variations pervading the whole of India from Cape Comorin to Afghanistan. So in one sentence, he knocks off all your theory of the Aryan invasion, that the North Indians have a different facial structure, that the South Indians have dark skin with a different facial structure. He says all that is nonsense. There are variations among the North. You don't say the UPites and the Biharis and the Bengalis are there, but yet to call them North Indians, Aryan race. He says similar are the variations down below in South. It doesn't mean there are only dark people here, there are not dark people in the North. Just all this is nonsense. In fact, the language is therefore discredited as an ethnological factor. And I'm reading those because unfortunately on this theory, there have been political parties which have been made, and you know what I mean. And parties on the basis of their false ideology, they fight each other saying, I am a Dravidian, I am a this thing, so you are not. You see how deep this unnecessary falsehood has gone into our Indian concept. And we fight each other. Now you see, whole of India is being split up. Bombayis don't want the North Indians, South Indians don't want this, and North Indians don't want. What is this nonsense? It's only one single race. Look at Sri Aurobindo. It says, the races of India may be all pure Dravidians. If indeed such an entity as Dravidian race exists or ever existed. Or they may be pure Aryans. If indeed such an entity as an Aryan race exists or ever existed. Or there may be a mixed race with one predominant strain. But in any case, the linguistic division of the tongues of India into the Sanskritic and the Tamilic counts for nothing in that problem. Yet so great is the force of attractive generalizations and widely popularized errors that all the world goes on perpetuating the blunder, talking of the Indo-European races, claiming or disclaiming Aryan kinship and building on that basis of falsehood the most far-reaching political, social, pseudo-scientific conclusions. And the great Aryan thing that was taken up most violently by Hitler himself. He said the Aryans are superior to others, and others have therefore no right to exist. So you see, a simple falsehood can create so much of disharmony, so much of sadness and torture and suffering for humanity. So why we want to correct these things is, when Sri Aurobindo tells us about all these things, now we can at least ideologically understand. When Maharashtra is fighting for North and South, at least we Aurobindonians should know what the truth. Is there really a North Indian? Is there really a South Indian? Is there really the East or a Bengal or a West? It's nothing. Either we are all pure Dravidians or we are all pure Aryan. There's no invasion from outside. There's one homogeneous race in India. Because of the climatic factors, because of the geographical factors, my skin may be darker, your skin may be lighter because of our weathers. Nothing more than that. So, you see, long back, you can imagine this was sometime in 1980s, 1918. And it's only now that we have some books brought out against this theory. A good book you should read is by Michael Danino, The Invasion That Never Was. Because you see, and then also if you have time and energy and perseverance, read Amal Kiran, who was the first man to bring out in detail this question of the Aryan invasion. And subsequently there are other scholars who have brought out, and even now there are some Indian scholars, not Aurobindonians necessarily, who are coming out with this solution that there never was an Aryan invasion. You see, it is so sad to see all this, because what horrendous effects it has had on humanity. Just the question of I am an Aryan and you are not an Aryan. Hitler did that. In India we are doing that, and still now in India is being split up. And then we have so much of prejudice, mental prejudice. Really look deep within us. We suffer with a tremendous prejudice in our own country. Oh, I am a North Indian, he's a South Indian. Because prejudice of superiority. Prejudice means what? I think that I am superior to you because I am not. South says, I am more ancient than you, so all this nonsense must be erased at one stroke if we want to call ourselves truly Indians. In fact, long back, when Aurobindo had given the first message, if you remember, he said, India is free, but is it united? Then he said, one day India will be united. So he did foresee this kind of a divisive consciousness that will enter India after the Britishers have gone. And it's only now we see the worst of it. Everyone fighting for the little statehood. Everyone saying, no, let me be a Punjabi, let me be a UPI, let me be a Bihari, develop my state, all that thing. So this was all that I could say on a single word, Aryan. So you see the high concept we had, how it has come down to the racial level, and not only here in India, but in Germany it was taken up and translated into horrendous measures. So all that for a noble concept which had nothing to do with race, which had nothing to do with divisions, it was purely a spiritual thing. But alas, we don't know when the world would start reading Aurobindo and understand the truth. But that is the depth of the word when Sri Krishna utters this single sentence that, O Arjuna, this is not the way cherished by the Aryan man. Right? It is of great significance, otherwise Lord Krishna would not have taken the name. He would have said, this is not the way cherished by a kshatriya. But he uses the word the Aryan way. So obviously, there's a great meaning in that. And after that, those of you who have this book, some of you I hear have xeroxed some copies. But if you can go back in this book to page 45. If you have the book, please go to page 45. That is Man and the Battle of Life. That is the chapter. I'll just read out one para just to catch up with the present chapter. You see, the first concept was the Aryan fighter, which we have clarified. Next, Lord Krishna would say, well, let me come back to this text and then I'll refer you to page 45. I'll start reading the text of this chapter 7. The answer of the divine teacher to the first flood of Arjuna's passionate self-questioning, his shrinking from slaughter, his sense of sorrow and sin, his grieving for an empty and desolate life, his forecast of evil results of an evil deed, is a strongly worded rebuke. So this rebuke is what we are saying here, the sloka that I have just now read. And verse number 3 also says, "Fall not from the virility of the fighter and the hero, O Partha. It is not fitting to thee. Shake off this paltry faint-heartedness and arise, O scourge of thine enemy." So these are the strong words that are used by Sri Krishna. So that's what Sri Aurobindo is referring to. All this, it is replied, is confusion of mind and delusion. A weakness of the heart and unmanliness, a fall from the virility of the fighter and the hero. Not this was fitting in the son of Pritha. Not thus should the champion and chief hope of a righteous cause abandon it in the hour of crisis and peril, or suffer the sudden amazement of his heart and senses, the clouding of his reason and the downfall of his will, to betray him into the casting away of his divine weapons and the refusal of his God-given work. This is not the way cherished and followed by the Aryan man. This mood came not from heaven, nor can it lead to heaven. And on earth it is the forfeiting of the glory that waits upon strength and heroism and noble works. Let him put from him this weak and self-indulgent pity. Let him rise and smite his enemies. So we see he is kind of chiding Arjuna on two fronts. One, that this is not the Aryan way. That we have explained quite a lot. Two, this is not the kshatriya way too. That you are a kshatriya and this is not the way that a kshatriya should really respond and react. And that too at an hour of crisis, when a kshatriya is called upon to act his best. So what is this kshatriya? Turn to page 45. I have one paragraph to read out. The second paragraph, the middle of the page. The Gita is therefore addressed to a fighter, a man of action, one whose duty in life is that of war and protection. War as a part of government for the protection of those who are excused from that duty, debarred from protecting themselves and therefore at the mercy of the strong and the violent. Violent war, secondly, and by a moral extension of this idea, for the protection of the weak and the oppressed and the maintenance of right and justice in the world. For all these ideas, the social and practical, the moral and chivalrous enter into the Indian conception of the kshatriya, the man who is a warrior and the ruler by function and a knight and a king in his nature. Now see, this is of course we have all read this before, but I'd like to bring out another point here. You see, first of all, he is one who is chivalrous, who is a knight, and king in his nature. That means the kshatriya person, although he is dynamic, full of the rajasic energy, but he is one who has the control over his rajas. That's what is important. And here he says, the second idea is the protection of the weak and the oppressed and for the maintenance of right and justice in the world. Now just come to the next line, next para, I'll continue, then I'll explain perhaps. Continue the same para, turn to page 46 and you will see the sentence. The ancient Indian civilization laid peculiar stress on the individual nature, tendency, temperament, and sought to determine by the ethical type, function, and place in the society. Nor did it consider man primarily as a social being or the fullness of his social existence at the highest ideal, but rather as a spiritual being in the process of formation and development, and his social life, ethical law, play of temperament, and exercise of function as means and stages of spiritual formation. You see, this is the ideal that we had in the ancient Indian civilization, where Aurobindo says that system differed from the modern in its conception. To the modern mind, man is a thinker, worker, or producer, and a fighter all in one. And the tendency of the social system is to lump all these activities and to demand from each individual his contribution to the intellectual, economical, military life and the needs of the community without paying any heed to the demands of his individual nature and temperament. This is a concept which I think we discussed last time, but I'm bringing it in relation to the present one. The advantage of this classification of kshatriya, Brahmin, Vaishya, Shudra, etc. was that first of all, the Indian concept, as it says, focused upon the individual nature and temperament. It is what we said, the swabhava. And because they did not take man in a utilitarian sense, but what is your swabhava, that you fulfill, and by fulfilling your swabhava, you contribute to the society. So they said, it's not that I want classification, is a Brahman is a higher, or Kshatriya is lower, or Shudra is the last one. No. This is a corrupted form of the classes. But there's nothing wrong to say that this is your temperament. I mean, maybe say, I'm a kind of now so-called attributed to as a philosopher and man of knowledge, etc. So this becomes my temperament, my nature. If I were to start getting into the Vaishya, that means, the production of money and the harmony and all that. It's just that I can't do that. It's not my temperament, my nature. So, if I can do this knowledge works well, I contribute to the social growth. But if you say, no, Anand Reddy, you have also to start earning money and doing the Vaishya job, it's not that I don't want to do, it's nothing less or more, it's less respectable or more respectable. It's just that by doing that, I may not be able to contribute much to the social growth or to my own growth. And to tell you frankly, I did try it out and I was a miserable failure. I started a business, called it Aroma Chemicals. I was an agent for distributing chemicals to laboratories. And for 2 years I did tried my hand out, as we say. I used to distribute chemicals to our industrial estate, take orders for acetic acid and this, I don't even know the hydraulic acid. There's something called hydraulic acid? No. Hydrochloric acid is there. So, chemistry was my weakest subject when I was a student, and I think mother played a good joke on me. I had to relearn all my chemistry, at least the names, because when I had to take down the names, if I said hydrochloric or hydraulic, you know what it means. So I had to get back my chemistry, take the orders and supply. And my wife would vouch for it that I hardly ever got profit out of that. Because, the supply and the demand were equal and I hardly brought back any money at home. But what I sold was not the chemicals, but Aurobindo's books. Not sold knowledge. I used to speak to them about, because when I gave my, the visiting card, they said double MA and philosophy and literature. It says, hey, you are in the wrong place or the wrong man. Because, double MA with literature and philosophy selling chemicals would say, what is this nonsense? So, then I had to talk to them and talking to them about Aurobindo and all that. That's good. But business was a failure. So that's what we say, there has got to be a temperament which suits, and that is what our ancient system really emphasized upon. Not the classes to separate the society. but to bring in that what you can do best, do that. It's as simple as that. But that is where Sri Aurobindo says the demands of his individual nature and temperament